I'm Leo Ehrlich, Chief Executive Officer at CTIX. Thank you and good morning, everyone. Before we begin, I would like to remind listeners that this call will contain forward-looking statements made pursuant to the Safe Harbor provisions of the Private Securities Litigation Reform Act of 1995, including statements concerning projected timelines for the initiation and completion of clinical trials, our future drug development plans, other statements regarding future product developments, and any other statements which are not historical fact. These statements involve risks, uncertainties, and assumptions that could cause CTIX's actual results and experience to differ materially from anticipated results and expectations expressed in these forward-looking statements. CTIX has in some cases identified forward-looking statements by using words such as anticipates, believes, hopes, expects, plans, intends, goal, potential, may, and similar expressions. Among other factors that could cause actual results to differ materially from those expressed in forward-looking statements are CTIX's need for and the availability of substantial capital in the future to fund its operations and research and development. The fact that CTIX's compounds may not successfully complete preclinical or clinical testing or be granted regulatory approval to be sold and marketed in the United States or elsewhere. A more complete description of these risk factors is included in the CTIX's filings with the Securities and Exchange Commission, which are available at sec.gov and on CTIX.com. You should not place undue reliance on any forward-looking statements. CTIX undertakes no obligation to release publicly the results of any revisions to any such forward-looking statements that may be made to reflect events or circumstances after the date of this call or to reflect the occurrence of unanticipated events except as required by applicable law or regulation. I'd like to speak briefly about our pipeline and the direction of our company before turning things over to Dr. Arthur Bertolino, President and Chief Medical Officer at CTIX, who will then provide an update regarding recently achieved clinical milestones with particular emphasis given to brilicidin interim trial results in inflammatory bowel disease and oral mucositis. As we continue to expand the data set across our portfolio of clinical assets, which include our three first-in-class compounds, brilicidin, purosol, and Kevitrin, the considerable potential of our pipeline is becoming even more apparent. All of our current efforts are aimed at maximizing our return on investment for each of these assets. Only a few years ago, we had a single phase 1 trial underway. Today, we currently are running 4 phase 2 clinical trials, each for indications with large unmet medical needs. Moreover, we have met the primary endpoint in every clinical trial completed to date. Needless to say, and much of the credit of the hard work put in by everyone at CTIX, I'm extremely proud of what we have accomplished and believe that these successes are indicative of what we can achieve going forward. Now, 4 months into 2017, we continue to move methodically and in a cost-effective manner in the clinical development of brilicidin, purosol, and Kevitrin. Importantly, we've incorporated feedback from potential large pharmaceutical partners who have expressed a keen interest in our drug candidates and with whom we maintain open lines of communication. In fact, partnering our products is the primary strategic focus of the company in 2017. What is clearly evident from our interactions is that Big Pharma is closely watching our progress, and we look forward to sharing top-line results from each of our phase 2 trials with them later this year. In closing, CTIX is an emerging specialty pharma company with a unique value proposition. Few companies of our size have such a robust and mature portfolio of first-in-class drug candidates representing significant commercial opportunities. We're excited about what the future holds in 2017 and beyond, the life-changing medicines CTIX is working diligently to bring to market. I thank every shareholder for helping us to reach this point and for your constant support. With that, I will turn things over to Dr. Bertolino.
Thank you, Leo, and good morning, everyone. Today, I will tell you about brilicidin for inflammatory bowel disease and oral mucositis. As you can see from our anticipated and achieved clinical milestones, we are delivering well on many important events that should be valuable to the company. Today, I will tell you about interim analysis results for our IBD, ulcerative proctitis study, and for oral mucositis. The mechanism of action of brilicidin is actually multiple. You may be familiar with the effectiveness as an antibacterial, as already demonstrated in our successful phase 2b ABSI clinical trial. However, it is also a very strong inhibitor of phosphodiesterase 4, which makes it a novel anti-inflammatory drug candidate. It functions through cyclic AMP and cyclic GMP pathway modulation and suppresses pro-inflammatory mediators while increasing anti-inflammatory mediators. That lessens inflammation and promotes healing. Brilicidin for inflammatory bowel disease is very attractive. This is a hard-to-treat chronic condition that affects over 1 million people in the U.S. It's actually a group of inflammatory conditions of the colon and small intestine. The principal types are Crohn's disease and ulcerative colitis, with ulcerative proctitis and ulcerative proctosigmoiditis subcategories of ulcerative colitis. The etiology is autoimmune, and there are many GI symptoms. Medications for treatment include systemic biologics as well as more traditional medications, but there's a need for new effective medications. When you look at the distribution of Crohn's disease in the GI tract, it's patchy. It can have skip areas. When you look at ulcerative colitis, it's basically a distal disease in the GI tract and has contiguous involvement from the most distal areas. As well as the injectable biologics at this point for treatment, there are oral medications and various forms of local delivery for distal disease, including suppositories, foams, and various enemas. The market opportunity for inflammatory bowel disease is quite attractive. As I mentioned, there are over 1 million people in the U.S. who have inflammatory bowel disease, and almost twice as many in Europe. The biologic market is growing, but there have also been many notable deals for inflammatory bowel disease, with small farmers being absorbed into larger farmers. You can see the magnitude of these deals are measured in the billions of dollars. So it is also a very attractive potential for partnering. There's a treatment paradigm that's changing at this point. Rather than just trying to get the clinical symptoms to improve, we're really focused on trying to get healing of the mucosa, healing of the GI tract, and that means disappearance of ulcers. So that's the direction that all the current aspiring treatments are going towards. That means the ulcers disappear, the friability, blood, erosions, all improve with treatment. That's the therapeutic goal at this point. So it's a very stringent high bar. Our trial for ulcerative proctitis and ulcerative proctosigmoiditis is a proof of concept trial. It's phase 2, open label, dose escalating. It looks at efficacy, safety, and the absorption of drug for pharmacokinetics, looking at 3 dosing regimens of 50 milligrams, followed by 100 milligrams, followed by 200 milligrams in sequential cohorts. The drug is administered daily by retention enema, and we've looked at mild to moderate disease. We're currently midway in our last cohort and look forward to completing the trial. Again, because the focus these days is to look at mucosal healing, endoscopic evaluation is a key part of this evaluation, as well as improvement in clinical signs. The primary efficacy endpoint utilizes what's called a modified Mayo Disease Activity Index scoring system. That primary efficacy endpoint is clinical remission at day 42, 6 weeks into treatment, using that modified Mayo scoring. It involves the endoscopy findings, rectal bleeding, and an improvement or no change in stool frequency. You'll see on this slide the particulars of the modified Mayo Disease Activity Index and various secondary endpoints that we've also included in the study. Here's what we've achieved, and it's quite impressive at this point, even at interim analysis. At day 42, week 6, we've achieved clinical remission in half of the patients in each of the first 2 cohorts, And the remaining patients who did not meet all three criteria for clinical remission at least had two of the three criteria achieved, meaning partial response. There was notable improvement in 10 out of 11 patients looking at the full modified Mayo Disease Activity Index, including endoscopy. And we also had notable improvement in 11 of the 12 patients where we looked just at the clinical signs, the partial MMDAI. Across the board, there was an improvement in quality of life reported by all subjects at this point at 6 weeks of treatment. So we're very pleased with the efficacy results so far achieved. And we're also pleased that it was generally well tolerated with no serious adverse events, good laboratory review, and stable vital signs. In addition, when we looked for systemic exposure with very sensitive assays, we had very low systemic exposure. In the first cohort, the 50 milligram group, the brilicidin concentrations in plasma were less than 100 nanograms per mil. And in the second cohort, 100 milligrams treatment, the average maximum brilicidin concentration was 215 nanograms per mil. So we have very limited systemic exposure that goes along with these very encouraging efficacy results. In summary, we have a beneficial response in all 12 patients after 6 weeks in daily treatment with brilicidin. There was an improved quality of life. The brilicidin was generally well tolerated, and the drug concentrations showed limited systemic absorption. Let me shift now to brilicidin for oral mucositis. This is a painful and common complication of chemoradiation. In our particular clinical trial that we're looking at, that I will go over with you, we're talking about head and neck cancer, where chemoradiation is used for treatment of the head and neck cancer. There's high incidence of oral mucositis in this population, and no currently approved medications to prevent the oral mucositis in this population. Current treatments are limited and mostly just materials that will cover the affected area and provide some type of relief. Capivance is a drug that's been around for a while with limited indications, and it is not for the indication in head and neck cancer. There's a significant market of about 500,000 patients in the U.S. alone, and there is a lot of cost involved when patients get sick with this problem. There's limited competition. You may have seen recently some results from Sologenics, where there is an IV administration of a compound that limits the duration of severe oral mucositis when it occurs, but it has not been aimed at preventing the oral mucositis. So this is a good area for us to deliver something that will be very effective in prevention of the problem. Here's our phase 2 study trial design. It's a phase 2 multi-center randomized double-blind placebo-controlled study. We look at efficacy and safety of an oral rinse that's administered 3 times a day for 7 weeks. The focus here is to attenuate oral mucositis, preventing its occurrence in this population. And you see, we compare the oral rinse with the active brilicidin compared to placebo. The primary objective is to look at the efficacy in reducing that incidence of severe oral mucositis, WHO grade 3 or above in the head and neck cancer population, who are receiving concomitant chemoradiation therapy. Safety and tolerability is also a focus of the study. The primary endpoint is the proportion of patients experiencing severe oral mucositis, WHO grade 3 or greater, during chemoradiation, meaning a cumulative radiation dose of at least 55 gray units. The WHO oral mucositis grading scale was used in this study, and a number of secondary and additional endpoints were examined in our ad hoc interim analysis. The patient population who were evaluable for this ad hoc interim analysis was met as far as their inclusion criteria and criteria for evaluation by 19 patients. 9 patients in the brilicidin treatment arm and 10 patients in the placebo treatment arm. The brillocydin markedly reduced the incidence of severe oral mucositis, WHO grade 3 or above, in this population of head and neck cancer patients receiving a cumulative radiation dose of at least 55 gray units. You can see here in this bar graph that the placebo arm had an incidence of 70%, 7 out of 10 patients experienced WHO grade 3 or above severe oral mucositis. And the brillocydin treatment group, as shown here by the smaller bar in the graph, represents 2 of 9 patients, only 22.2% who experienced WHO grade 3 or above severe oral mucositis. This is a dramatic improvement, and the clinical results are consistent with the preclinical animal model in which the severe oral mucositis was reduced by over 90% in a hamster model shown in the lower right-hand corner of this slide. In addition, brillocydin delayed time to onset of severe oral mucositis, and when it did occur, it lasted for about 10.5 to 14 days mean duration. When we look at the safety data, it was generally well tolerated. Adverse events were typical for the patient population. There were no treatment group differences, and concomitant medications were not different either. Pharmacokinetics, interestingly, no measurable brillocydin concentration in plasma with a very sensitive assay that had a lower limit of quantification of 10 nanograms per milliliter. So that means we got the benefit without getting systemic absorption. Here's the overall summary of the ad hoc interim analysis. Again, the marked reduction in incidence of severe oral mucositis, WHO grade 3 or above, with 7 of 10 patients, 70% having the problem in the placebo arm, and the marked reduction to only 2 of 9 patients in the active brillocydin treatment arm. That's 22.2%. Brillocydin delayed the time to onset of severe oral mucositis when it did occur, and the duration was in the range of 10.5 to 14 days. Toleration was generally very good as an oral rinse, and again, there was no measurable systemic absorption. So to present the overall message of today, brillocydin is a novel inflammatory drug candidate. Encouraging preliminary efficacy and safety has now been seen in 2 relevant indications, both in oral mucositis and in the subtypes of inflammatory bowel disease, ulcerative proctitis, ulcerative proctosigmoiditis. Because we see this in multiple indications performing well regarding efficacy and safety, we're encouraged that there's increased potential for even additional anti-inflammatory uses as a topical localized treatment. We could imagine the drug being very useful for atopic dermatitis, hidradenitis suppurativa, and acne. So an expansion into multiple dermatologic indications seems very viable at this point in time.
This concludes the presentation for today. Thank you for your attendance.